A fugue is one of the most incredible exercises in musical logic, thought, and development. Though argumentative in its nature, it is completely different from any of the sonata-style forms we've looked at in my other videos. Being a tool of supreme musical logic, the fugue has resonated throughout the centuries, from Handel's Messiah to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, from Benjamin Britten's Mad Fugue, where he employs every single instrument group in the orchestra, to Leonard Bernstein's Jazz Fugue in West Side Story. However, the undisputable master of the fugue, without any doubt, was J.S. Bach. This is because, at his best, he was able to blend an almost mathematical perfection of the art form with his own profound emotional realizations. Bach almost literally wrote the book on fugues. He produced two books called the Well-Tempered Clavier, known by some as the Old Testament of piano music, if Beethoven's sonatas are the New Testament. These two books each have 24 preludes and fugues, one set for each key. And we've looked at preludes in another video, but these books are like an exploration of the full possibilities of the fugue. He also wrote an unfinished masterwork, The Art of Fugue, the culmination of his life's work, which is practically a textbook of the incredible musical potential of the simplest musical idea. You can also find some of his richest and most powerful fugues in his vocal works. Try his motets or his B minor Mass. So what is a fugue? Well, it's not so much a strict form, but rather a process of development. You can think of it as a medium to express musical ideas, rather than a stricter form like sonata form. Music can be written in fugue, so it's a technique of writing, and a piece that's entirely in fugue is a fugue. A fugue is essentially the discussion of a compact melodic idea by a definite number of voices in imitation. So you'll have a fugue on this theme for 4 voices in imitation. Having 4 voices means that there'll be 4 musical lines which are independent of each other, rhythmically and melodically. They'll each do their own thing, but when you hear them all together at the same time, you realize that they're harmonically dependent on each other. So on paper, horizontally, they're each independent, interesting lines, but vertically, they make up chords and combinations. This is what's called counterpoint. Writing in counterpoint is challenging. To make it work well, you need to use various rules, but actually, as with similar cases in poetry or painting, being restricted by certain rules can allow some incredible artistry to flourish. Restricting yourself to, say, 3 or 4 voices and the rules of counterpoint forces the artist to be sometimes amazingly creative to solve musical problems and find their way brilliantly out of impossibly tight spots. It's a bit like doing a hard Sudoku puzzle, only with far more creative and emotional scope. And because there are all these rules, it makes it all the more impressive when the artist is then able to make the fugue emotionally powerful too. So, a fugue will discuss a compact idea with a definite number of voices in imitative counterpoint. The word fugato refers to a section of music in fugue. Many symphonies will have brief passages in fugue, like this one. So we call that a fugato. But now I want to look at a fugue, that is, a piece written completely in fugue. Let's look at how it all works. I'm going to use the C minor fugue for 4 voices from Book 2 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. It's not necessarily Bach's best, but it uses a lot of different techniques which I can draw on for examples. A fugue will begin with something called an exposition, where the material is exposed. The melodic idea is called the subject. So here is our subject. And a fugue will begin with a single voice announcing the subject. A second voice announces the answer. This is a reproduction of the subject, but it's transposed to be in or on the dominant. And importantly, for whatever reason, the answer will always be on the dominant. The answer could be a real answer, which is an exact transposition of the subject, and that would sound like this. Or it could be a tonal answer, which is a very slightly altered transposition. Here, for various harmonic reasons, Bach uses a tonal answer. Though typically in a fugue, it doesn't really matter whether an answer is real or tonal. So each voice is introduced in turn like this: tonic subject, dominant answer, tonic subject, dominant answer, until every voice has entered. Once every voice has completed its subject or answer, the exposition is over. After the exposition, there are no strict rules for how the overall structure will look. The composer is free to develop the fugue however they see fit. Now let's look at the counter subject. This is a common feature but not a necessity. So we've had our first voice enter at the beginning. Now watch how the first voice accompanies the answer. If this musical idea keeps occurring throughout the exposition to accompany future subjects and answers, we can call it a counter subject. If it only appears once, it's not really of interest. In this case, it does appear again, so I'm happy to call it a counter subject, though Bach doesn't really use it much for the rest of this piece. Some people use the word counter subject to mean a new subject, introduced later on in the fugue. Let's say this new subject is stated by itself and in vivid contrast to the main subject. It'll then produce a great effect when it finally comes into contact with the main subject in an exercise of counterpoint. There's another aspect of fugue called an episode. This is simply a name for those portions of the fugue when the complete subject is not being heard at all. An episode can be one bar, like here, or many bars. Now let's look at some techniques. A canon is when different voices play the same music, starting at different times, so that they overlap and accompany each other. And we use the word canon to describe full appearances of the subject, not just brief glimpses. You might already know a famous canon, such as Frere Jacques or London's Burning. In counterpoint, we can also have canons at different intervals in the scale. So we could have a canon at the unison, or a canon at the second, or even a canon at the seventh, or anywhere along the scale. Augmentation is the delivery of the subject or counter-subject in consistently slower notes, like here. Diminution is the opposite, the delivery of the subject in quicker note values. This fugue doesn't have any diminution. Inversion, most commonly, means the vertical reflection of the subject. This fugue has a few cases of not quite exact inversion, but close enough to be worth mentioning. And lastly, stretto. Stretto is the overlapping of the subject with one or more answers. It's when the entries of the subject are squeezed together so that they overlap. This term should not be used for mere sketchy allusions to the subject, such as those you might find in an episode. Rather, we should use stretto to describe moments when the subject and answer survive more or less completely in each voice. Here's an example of stretto from this fugue. Fugues can get more and more complex. You can have a double fugue, meaning a fugue which exposes two subjects. This might begin with two voices announcing two subjects at the same time, as happens here. Or the fugue might have two separate expositions for the different subjects, and eventually the two subjects will be combined together. Bach even wrote some triple fugues, showing his mastery of counterpoint. But what I've given you here are all the basics you need to know to follow most fugues and pieces of counterpoint. As I say, at their best, fugues can be the most powerful exercises in musical logic, thought and development, and this is why they're well worth deeper study. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be making more like this, so please do subscribe, like it, share it, and let me know what you might like to see next. Thanks for watching.